Welcome to the Connected Mom podcast, friends. I'm excited about today's conversation. It's different than any other conversation we've had in the past so far. We're going to be talking a little bit about teen moms. And so, if you know a teen mom, if you have a teen, if you were a teen mom, lean in and listen. I'm excited about this conversation. And as always, we hope that today's conversation is going to help you to connect a little more deeply with God, more empathetically with your fellow moms, and more intentionally with your child. And so, our guest today is Lisa Stephen, and she is the author of the book A Place to Belong. She is also the founder of Hope House, which is in Denver, Colorado, and serves teen moms. And so I'm just really excited to get into this with her. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me, Becky. I'm super excited to be here with you and just to share with your listeners.
Yeah, so let's begin at the beginning. Tell us your story.
Oh, that is definitely the beginning. So, my husband and I started dating when we were 16 years old and became pregnant when we were 17 years old and got married 2 weeks after finding out we were pregnant. So, my wedding proposal was outside of the clinic where we had learned that we were pregnant. Um, it was definitely, it was a, a shock, but also something that we immediately were like, we need to get married. Like we want to have this baby. We want to raise this baby together. I came from a fairly dysfunctional home, a lot of chaos in my home, a lot of domestic violence. My husband had just he still has just beautiful parents I often joke with him, I married you for your parents. Like they had the family I wanted. They ate dinner at the table together. His parents loved each other so unconditionally and just respected each other. And I was very nervous, more nervous to tell his parents than I think I was to tell my own. And they immediately, and it was not an easy, even though my husband had amazing parents, they had their own challenges. My mother-in-law was diagnosed with a kidney disease when she was pregnant with her fourth child and ended up on dialysis. And I just loved how my father-in-law took care of my mother-in-law. My soon-to-be husband, at the age of 17, in his infinite wisdom, decided we should tell his parents while they were doing dialysis at home and watching a movie. So I'm just panicking, thinking, here's this woman who's got her blood going through a machine next to us, and you want to tell her that we're pregnant, and I'm afraid we're gonna, shock her to death. But the most amazing thing was that their reaction really was, of course, they were. This is not something anyone wants for their 17-year-old kiddos, but their reaction really was, well, what are we going to do next? We need to talk about marriage, what marriage looks like, how to be married, how we care for one another in marriage, and they just sort of assumed this was the direction that we would go, and we're gonna give you some guidance on what this looks like. And it was what could have been, and I'm sure was for them, a very probably traumatic moment, was a beautiful moment in many ways for my husband and I, even in such a hard circumstance.
Okay, so you get married at 17.
Yes.
Where did you live? Did you finish high school? What did all of that look like?
Yeah. So we did both finish high school. I was a senior in high school and he was a junior, so he was a year behind me. I finished through back then a correspondence course because we didn't have computers, so it was through the mail. He finished through an online, like through a. It was also a correspondence course through a like a school in another state that did correspondence high school, so he could work. And he worked for his father. We were very blessed that he and his dad worked together and owned a machine shop together for many, many years. And his dad just retired. So we were very blessed that we had that, but we were still very poor. We were, saving every month just to have enough money to pay the rent and kind of barely making ends meet. And I eventually started doing home daycare. We have been married for 38 years. We have 3 adult kids now and 3 beautiful grandchildren. And I often say, I don't know how anybody does marriage without God in their marriage, but definitely being such a young couple, um, being able to turn to God. And I think early in our marriage, I had probably had a stronger relationship with God. He had a lot of questions like, the big questions of why do such bad things happen in the world if God exists? And so it was a bit more of a journey for him, coming to Christ, which he really eventually did through Promise Keepers. But his mother was such a influence in our life, and just um, pushed me to go to MOPS, now called the Mom Co. But back then it was MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers. And my mother-in-law was one of the very first, those 8 ladies who kind of were that first MOPS group ever that met at Trinity Baptist Church in Wheat Ridge, Colorado. And so they're known as the Fenton Street Gang because they all lived on Fenton Street, and they kind of were the first group that started MOPS. And she really insisted that I go. And here I was with, a 2-year-old, and I'm at that point 19 years old, and I'm like, the last thing I want to do is walk into a room full of women who did it right, who all had it put together and married. And you, as a teenage mom, you really face a lot of judgment and kind of shame, really everywhere you go. Particularly, you walk into a grocery store and someone's looking at you like, is that baby your sister or your kid? That's the nice side of judgment. There's also a lot more difficult, just a lot of stigma that comes with it. And so I was very trepidatious about going to MOPS, and it was totally the opposite. It was just a group of women that embraced me and loved me just where I was, and were incredibly kind, and even gave me an early opportunity to be a co-leader of the kids group called Mopettes back then. And I was shocked. I'm like, do you know how old I am? Does anybody know that I'm only 20 at that point and you're allowing me an opportunity to lead? It was crazy and life-changing.
So, okay, when you going back to the original part of the story where you got pregnant, how did your parents react?
So my I would say that my parents were more they more wanted to know that we were going to fix the problem. Like, okay, you're getting married and you're kind of going to not be our problem anymore on some level. I definitely didn't grow up in a home where there was a lot of, at that point my parents had divorced. My mom and dad had a very, very messy divorce. There was, I think, probably some life-threatening situations that I talk about in my book, sadly, between my parents. And they really were living their own lives. And unfortunately, we had lost, there were 4 of us originally, and we lost my little brother when we were children, um, in a backyard accident. He accidentally hung himself. He had tied a jump rope to our swing set and got his neck caught in it. Um, and my parents were kind of a wreck before that happened, but after that happened, that was kind of, sort of a done deal that they were not gonna survive that tragedy. And so by the time I was 13, about 6 years after my brother had passed away, my parents had really just spiraled completely out of control. So, by the time I became pregnant, I really was, my sisters and I were really kind of on our own. I mean, my mom worked all the time. My dad was not heavily engaged in our life. Uh, from a young age, I really felt like I was kind of the protector and the carer of my sisters. I had a lot of what I felt were adult responsibilities, way before I was an adult, which is so true for the teenage moms that I worked with in MOPS. And then also today, the teen moms we work with almost always are carrying, lots of responsibilities far beyond their years.
That is such an interesting factor in all of this. Talk to us a little bit about that. So you started Hope House and you now minister to teen moms, and why do you think that is that a lot of them have that protector instinct, you know?
Yeah, yeah, so much there. First of all, I would say I began going to MOPS when I was a young mom. But then when my kids got old enough to graduate me from MOPS International, that was about the same time that MOPS had begun serving teenage moms through Teen MOPS. And so I had begun volunteering through a Teen MOPS group and was working with teenage moms, kind of just as volunteer work, thinking that at this point my kids were old enough, I thought I'd finally get a chance to go to college. And instead, God had, in his infinite wisdom, had a different plan for my life. I was so drawn to getting to serve those teenage moms. And even though I grew up in a very, broken home, I still grew up in a middle class home from the perspective of kind of middle class values. So in the middle class, we really we value saving money and getting an education and going to college. And there's an expectation that you'll have a career, not a job, and eventually you'll own a home. In generational poverty, it's very different. And so the teenage moms we worked with through MOPS and still today through Hope House, they have grown up in generational poverty. So they're
Okay, wait. Define generational poverty for us, would you?
Yes, absolutely. So essentially, it's generations of trauma, generations of growing up sort of on in the system, quote unquote, generations of being on, Section 8 or other types of governmental services, typically defined by generational addiction. So oftentimes there are generations of men who've been in jail, generations of men and women who have experienced addiction, domestic violence. Um, it's not just about not having enough money, being poor or in poverty, but it's about the types of traumas that we experience in generational poverty. And we really have a different middle class and generational poverty really have different value sets. So in generational poverty, it might be it's there's no expectation or even thought that you would go to college. You hopefully finish high school, if that, and get a job. And so we have very different kind of ways of looking at the world. Also, in the poverty class, they very much rely on relationship as almost a form of trade. So you watch your auntie's kiddos so that she will give you a ride to work, and vice versa. And so relationships become so critically important because you almost cannot lose them even if they're very, very unhealthy. So even though that auntie may be abusive to your child while she's babysitting your child, you can't afford to lose your auntie, because then you can't get to work, and then you can't pay for, food for your baby or diapers for your baby or whatever, your rent. And so it's and typically these kiddos, the reason our teenage moms and myself as well are so protective is that they typically have been caring for younger siblings or caring for family members, like maybe their mom is addicted, and so they're caring for her when she's had a relapse, as well as caring for younger kids.
Okay, so so tell us what Hope House is and what it does.
Yes. So essentially, out of that Teenage Moms MOPS group that I was working in 1997, we were dealing with, all of the things I just talked about. Didn't really have a ton of training on how to deal with those things, and began to build relationship and build trust with these young moms. And then they would come to us and say, "Hey, I'm living in a really unsafe situation," or "My mom just kicked me out and I'm sleeping in my car." And we were running around trying to figure out who provides housing for teenage moms in the Denver metro area. It turned out back then, and it's actually still true today, that there were no homes for parenting teenage moms. So all of the programs we had and still have in our state were maternity homes where you could go if you were pregnant and trying to make a birth decision, but you could only stay for 3 to 6 months after the baby's birth, typically. And then you were kind of right back into the poverty situation you came from. So we had all these really young moms and nowhere for them to go if they were 16 or 17 and parenting. There were other programs designed for those 18 and above, and typically 21 and above, as single moms. So that was really the beginning of God kind of tapping on our heart and saying, "Hey, maybe you should do something about this. There needs to be a safe place for these moms to go." And I had talked with my husband about it a little bit. And if you ever met him, I talk nonstop and love people. He's very shy, very introverted. He came home one day after work and he said, "I've been thinking about this whole idea of a home for teenage moms, and I think maybe it might be a calling." And he's never used that word before, and he's never used it since. I immediately put down the dishes I was doing and came and sat with him and said, "Tell me, what you're thinking." And that was really the beginning of a conversation around how do we do this? How do we start a home for teen moms when he's a machinist, I'm a stay-at-home mom doing home daycare. I had never gone to college, still haven't to this day, never did end up going. Like, who am I? I am not qualified to open a home for teenage moms. And it was just this crazy story of when, and really the premise of the book is when God kind of taps on your shoulder and says, "Hey, I have something for you." And you've got that still quiet voice and it won't leave you alone. But you're like, "Who, me? I'm not good enough or qualified enough or educated enough or rich enough or whatever it might be, that God will literally call the least equipped and then equip them to do something amazing.
So,
So
what year was that, Lisa?
that was in 2000. We started working on Hope House in the year 2000. We opened our residential home in the year 2003. And we started out as just a residential home for up to 6 teenage mamas and their kiddos at a time. And today, 22 years later, we serve about 265 teen moms every year on our campus in Arvada, Colorado. We have still that residential home that can still just serve 6 moms. We also have a very large resource center, a little bit like a school, but with lots of comfortable big dining room space and classroom spaces. Through our resource center, we serve the vast majority of those moms through our GED and high school program, college and career assistance, financial literacy, legal advocacy. And then on what we call the personal self sufficiency side, we do a lot of work around healthy relationships, making healthy choices, counseling, groups for moms who have, such as like adult children of alcoholics, a lot of work on spiritual growth and just how do we grow as a person and a mama. And then our third kind of primary program is our early childhood education program, which started out as just watching or babysitting the kids of our teenage moms and grew to really doing early learning with them. And just 3 weeks ago, we opened the doors to a brand new childcare center, licensed childcare center on our campus. And we serve about 100 of the children of our, or will serve, we're ramping up slowly, 100 of the children of our teenage moms full time, like full time licensed care, so mom can go to school or work full time.
That's great. So, give us the age of the youngest mom, not the name, but the age.
Sure. So we serve teen moms between the ages of 15 and 20 when they come into our program. They can be anywhere between 15 and 20, but they must be parenting when they come in. So they're not pregnant still. They've already had their baby. Sometimes their baby's 1 or 2 or 3 years old when they enter our program. And then we serve them until they turn 25. And it's a very long process to break that cycle of poverty. And our mission is to empower teenage moms to become self-sufficient. So we're, as well as for them to learn just how much God loves them and that He has a plan for their life.
So, are you housing more than six of them at this point, or do you house six and then the rest of them just go through the program?
Really, really great question. So we only ourselves house 6. Through our housing support program, we serve about 160 of our 265 moms, and that assistance might look like rental assistance as able. It's helping them get into a partner program that provides housing, learning how to navigate a lease or navigate a landlord who's maybe not fixing a bug problem that you've got. And then eventually, as our moms get older, we provide guidance on how to buy a home.
Okay, okay. That's really good. I like the beginning to the end there and really helping them get established and on their own 2 feet, because I think that that's important. So, of these teen moms, how many of them would you say on average come from some type of domestic violent situation?
Well, about 99% of our teenage moms have experienced generational poverty, as I kind of described before. So, not all of them have actually experienced domestic violence, but all of them have experienced generational trauma, whether that's homelessness or domestic violence or addiction in their family, various types of trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so a lot of times the church, not a particular church, but the church as a whole can come across a little bit judgmental of these really kids who are getting pregnant, and yet that's maybe all they've ever known. And so what is, like, talk to our moms who are listening, talk to our listeners, because some of them, have been in church for a long time. They've raised kids that they hope are going to wait for sexual activity until they get married. How can they come across as loving towards these teen moms?
Oh, that's such a beautiful and multi-layered question. The very like tip of the tongue answer is if you happen to bump into a mama who just looks young and you're in the grocery store, the very simple act of saying, "Oh my goodness, your baby's so cute. What is her name?" will literally disarm a teenage mom and help her to let her defenses down where she would just maybe talk like, "You noticed me? I can't believe you noticed me," or even to give her a little compliment like, "Goodness, I noticed that you're doing such a great job with your baby being fussy in the grocery store." As moms, we all love those, like, random moments where someone just says an encouraging word to us. Um, so I would say that what happens oftentimes is that we have a perception that, so often we'll have kind of the perception that a teen mom maybe had plans to go to high school or was in high school, had plans to go to college, getting pregnant, like just disrupted the plan. And maybe she had, she was having sex outside of marriage, obviously. And so in our context of Christianity, it's, we're not looking at it from that lens of having an understanding of generational poverty where the mamas we serve through Hope House, they don't know a single solitary soul that is married. They've never met someone who is married besides those of us that they interact with at Hope House, or maybe their teacher at school. Our average dropout rate is ninth grade. Most of our moms have dropped out by ninth grade. We have just sort of an idea that maybe this just derailed them a little bit, where most of our teenage moms will tell you, honestly, if I had $100 for every teenage mom who said to me, having my baby saved my life, I would not need to fundraise. Our moms, when they get pregnant, to them, it's the beginning of hope. It's a hope in their heart that I can do this differently than what I experienced. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to be a better mama than maybe what I experienced. But I literally don't know how, to the point you made. They've never seen it. So if you've grown up in a home where there is a lot of violence or addiction, or you like literally have never seen a healthy, stable family, it's really hard to build something you've never seen or never experienced.
Right,
So at Hope
right.
House, we get to do that. We get to come alongside them and be that kind of family that they maybe didn't have. And part of the reason we serve them for so long is that it takes such a long time for you to shift your worldview from, oh, this is how the world looks. Every kid grows up with, this kind of thing in their life, to learn that, no, that's actually not true. There are other ways to do this and ways that are better for you.
Can you give us the story of one teenage mom that maybe went all the way through the program and what her life looks like now?
Oh, such a great question. We actually have our annual gala coming up on November 2nd, and one of the moms who is speaking at the gala, I have the beautiful privilege of doing speech coaching with those moms, and she is going to tell her story of literally growing up in a home where she was placed in foster care due to abuse by her dad. The dad was eventually deported back to Mexico, and the mom had to work two jobs, was never at home, so she was alone a lot. She ended up at the age of 14, escaping, as she calls it, to live with a friend. The friend's mom managed an apartment building where she let the two of these girls, 14 and 15 years old, stay alone in an apartment. And needless to say, she couldn't pay the rent. So by the time she was 16, she had dropped out of school, was working full time to try to pay the rent. Met a boy at work that was just a little older than her and ended up moving in with him and becoming pregnant. He also came from a very traumatic background. And so um, this is actually fairly unusual. He was very committed to staying with her. He actually started going to counseling so he could figure out his own past trauma. She ended up finding out about Hope House when her baby was about a year old. She came here and was able to finish her GED. She went on to get certifications in early learning. She went through all of the parenting classes we offer. She went through counseling. She went through our healthy relationships classes. She and her husband did some counseling together. Um, Amazingly, they decided to start going to church and began to incorporate God and just learning how much God loves them into their life. And she actually now today is 25 years old. So she's become an alumni of our program. She has a job at our early learning center as one of our early learning teachers in our infant classroom. And she and her husband just 2 months ago purchased their first home out in Lochbuie. So they're far east, but that's how far away they had to go to afford something. But they have a home and and a healthy marriage and are raising healthy
So
kiddos.
that was the boyfriend that she got pregnant with, and then she eventually married him.
Yes. Yep.
That's that is a beautiful story, because I think sometimes um, we can look at situations like this and they can feel a little bit hopeless to us, and yet it's working, and the amount that you're pouring into these girls is beautiful. I love that story, and this is a great place for us to end the interview. So how can our listeners get in touch with you, Lisa, if they have more questions, or if they'd like to, get involved somehow in Hope House?
Yes, we would love that. You can find out everything you need to know on our website, hopehousecolorado.org, O-R-G. We also have two affiliates. We have a Hope House NoCo up in northern Colorado and Hope House Canyon City in Canyon City. So if you're in the Colorado area and either north or south, you can get engaged in volunteering there or here at our Arvada campus. We also have our first out-of-state affiliate opening in Orange County, California. And you can read all the crazy miracle stories of how God created Hope House in my book, A Place to Belong, that was just published and is available on Amazon.
Great. Thank you so much for being our guest today, Lisa. This is great. It's a very I love what you're doing. I love how you're investing in these teen moms. And hey, friends that are listening, maybe you know a teen mom, and I would love for you to start getting together with that teen mom, because I can assure you she needs you, and you can begin praying with her and finding out what her life is like. And maybe there are practical ways you can get involved. Even if you don't live in Colorado, I'm sure there are other teen moms around the country who could use your encouragement. So thanks for joining us today on The Connected Mom. And we hope you'll join us again next week for another episode where we hopefully are going to help you to connect more deeply with God, more intentionally with your child, and help you connect with your other friends who are moms. So thanks for joining us today.